Hey there, hey friends, Ken here, and welcome to the second video of Thrifty Pastel Month 2024. And today we are taking a look at water-soluble wax-based pastels, also known as watercolor crayons. Watercolor crayons are a stick medium made up of pigment and a wax-based binder formed into a pastel crayon shape. They tend to be on the softer side of the medium spectrum and blend out with water to give you a watercolor effect. Different from watercolor pencils, which are encased in wood and offer detailing abilities, crayons, on the other hand, are woodless, wider, and allows the user to cover a much larger surface area quicker. Watercolor crayons are more textured than other water-soluble stick media and are relatively smaller in size than most others. Available from many different art brands, they, like most other art supplies, come in different grades and quality. Like watercolors, they can be mixed and blended to make other colors, especially when working with a smaller numbered set. Yet, unlike watercolors, they seem to work well on many different surfaces, not just those made for water-soluble products. So these are the watercolor crayons that I have here in the studio. Now, I am doing this segment because I kind of wanted to touch on the difference in quality when it comes to watercolor crayons. There are very few professional grades as far as I know. And I'm always open to you jumping in the comment section and sharing any additional information that you may have. Now, Caran d'Ache has become known as the sort of echelon class of watercolor crayons in the art community as I know it. And in my opinion, they are the best watercolor crayon that I have personally ever used. Now, outside of this particular one, I have heard that Lyra, which if I'm not mistaken, is associated somehow with Rembrandt and Royal Talent, creates a watercolor crayon that is just as high quality as the Caran d'Ache. And I've heard many artists who use watercolor crayons sort of hint around that. I personally have never used that brand. I really am going to add it to my collection at some point. But as of right now, from what I've used, Caran d'Ache is the best, and this is a professional grade of watercolor crayons. Now, all of the other brands that I have, and many of the ones that you run across in your big box stores and on places like Amazon, are going to be student grade, and some may even target scholastic audiences. So like names of Faber-Castell, Sargent Art, you may be used to seeing watercolor crayons by companies like Mungio or Stettler. Now, all of these are going to fall into what, or as we know it, the student grade category. And the things that set student grade and professional apart in this particular medium are things like their smoothness, their softness, their ability to spread easily across the tooth of the paper, things like whether or not they dissolve easily within water, when activated in water, how well the pigment moves, how blendable it is, how easily it sinks down into the tooth of the paper. These are the different qualities you're looking to distinguish between the two. And you will find that the more professional quality watercolor crayons like Caran d'Ache, and from what I've heard, Lyra, are going to just give you a much easier time. Now, of course, the entire object is that this is a stick water-soluble medium that gives you watercolor effects, and it differs from watercolor pencils in many, many different ways. This being more of a pastel versus a pencil, that in itself is a huge difference. So scholastic crayons like Faber-Castell may offer you a window into a great way to start in the medium if you've never tried it, in order to test it out. That way you'll be getting a pretty decent brand watercolor crayon, and you won't be spending a lot of money in case you decide it's not for you. Now, there are also brands like Sargent Art, which are budget companies that white label through another manufacturer. Sargent Art happens to white label through Mungia, which is the company you heard me mention earlier. So Mungia is actually a really, really nice, decent watercolor crayon, and so is the Sargent Art brand, since it's produced by that factory. Then there are really economical brands like Sunny. I happen to have found this particular one on Temu, and it happens to be the set that I am currently testing for review. So there are many different watercolor crayons out there on the market from what I've seen lately with doing research. With that said, most of them will fall into the student grade category, and you just have to be really careful in reading the description and really checking behind the company that you're purchasing from. That way you can determine whether it's one that produces its own products or whether it actually white labels. Whereas Faber-Castell and Caran d'Ache will produce their own products, I'm willing to believe that companies like Sargent Art and Sunny, although Sunny may be an exception because I've read some things about them across the web as I've been researching them, that leads me to believe that they may be, that they produce an entire range of products in China. And they may actually have a factory that they produce in. So I'm going to do further research on that so I can disclose that information when I get to the review of these watercolor crayons. And with that said, this is the set that we're going to be using for demonstration today. So without further ado, I am going to grab me some watercolor paper and we are going to get started. So my friends, Thrifty Pastel Month, week 2, prompt distant. So I kind of want to do something a little whimsical and fun for this one. I grabbed a pad, or should I say a block of Academy 100% cotton watercolor paper, simply because I always want to give products that are on the more economical side a better chance on a good quality paper. And I decided I was going to do sort of a whimsical style lighthouse landscape, kind of playing off of distance as far as the lighthouse, helping distant ships come in, just trying to think outside of the box a little bit with this. So I started off with a transferred image, and then I went in with a sky blue and sapphire blue. Sky blue is the main color in the background, and sapphire blue at the top of my paper to make it a little darker and to add some depth to the sky. Now, the first technique that I used was actually direct to paper, where I took the crayons and went directly onto the paper with the pigment, and then used a soft synthetic brush to kind of dissolve the pigment out. Now, this paper is pretty textured. The tooth is almost similar to that of say Arches paper, in my opinion. Not quite, but in that same neighborhood. So it really did grab some of the pigment. Now, with this being a more economical set of watercolor crayons, the pigment tends not to blend out as well as, say, like a Caran d'Ache crayon would, or maybe even in this case not as well as the Sargent Art crayons I mentioned to you guys earlier. But nonetheless, I did kind of have to blend several different times, and I was able to get most of it blended out into the tooth of the paper, but it did leave a little bit of texture, which I don't really mind, because it puts me in the mind of what a granulated ultramarine blue would do to the sky if you used it. Next, I went in with a mixture of the Sunny Yellow, which is like the lemon yellow of this set, and I mixed it with a little bit of the red ochre. I was shooting to make sort of a yellow ochre color that I eventually blended more red ochre into, just to start forming the landmass. You're going to see me bounce back and forth between the yellow, the reddish brown, the red of the set, which is called Red Kiss. Got sort of a pinky undertone to it. It's a pretty red. The crayons, for what they are really do kind of catch you off guard. You don't really expect them to give you the pigment payoff or to really blend the way they do, depending on the technique that you use. The second technique you see me using here is the palette paper technique. You see me actually taking the crayons and scribbling them out on a palette, plastic palette, or something that you have abraded with, say, sandpaper, in order to give it a rough texture to make it grab, or a really, really, really smooth plastic like I'm using in this case tends to work really well. Third technique you see me using is directly from stick to paper. I'm actually taking a wet brush, I'm pulling the pigment off the end of the watercolor crayon, and I'm using it to paint with. Now, with those three techniques under my belt, I'm going to go back and forth between those, using them in order to get this painting illustrated. Now, the idea was to have this rocky kind of seascape. You know, how we set out with this image in our head of what we're going to get done. But I must say that parts of the parts of this project really did fight me. I especially had issues with the area under the house and the lighthouse. It was supposed to sort of be hilly, with this rocky line of rocks. Yeah, rocky line of rocks in front of it. Now, I'm going to get the rocks to a point where I'm pretty happy with those, but that hill, the rolling hill, just did not, I'm not going to end up being happy with it. And sometimes you get that when you're using a new product, you can't really get it to do what you want. What I did find that although the crayons are usable, I was having an issue really getting super dark. You can get the brown, which again is a red ochre, so it's a red brown, but the darkest tone in the set is the black. And even with mixing the blue and the brown, you don't really get a really saturated neutral. It's really desaturated. So I was fighting with that just a little bit. And I'm going to eventually go in with some black fine liners in order to add a deeper element of shadow to the entire overall composition, simply because I really could not achieve the depth that I wanted from mixing the pigments of these crayons together. Now, it's going to be my assumption that, due to the fact that they are super economical the way that they are, they probably have a lot of different products mixed into the stick, more so than just pigment. So, I don't know. You just have to kind of remember what you're working with and kind of plan ahead, and just make sure that you give yourself grace when you're working with really economical products, because you're going to have to do the best you can with what you have. It just kind of boils down to that. So now I'm going in with fine liners. I originally started out with Derwent line makers. One of them never seems to work for me. I've never had good luck with those pens. So I switched over to my Creative Mark super black fine liners, which I got from Jerry's a couple of years ago, and they have never failed me. Um, every single time I pull one out, it works, unless I've already used it up. And I feel like they're a really dependable fine liner, and, I really stand by them. So I used that black in order to put some more dark into I just couldn't seem to achieve the level of neutrality, or the level of neutral saturation from any of the mixtures that I was trying. And the black pen really did give me sort of, I felt like, what I needed, that extra added layer. With that said, it also took the composition a little cartoony, you know? It added to that element of that storybook feel that my paintings can lean towards really quickly if I don't watch it. If I don't keep my eye on realism, if I don't keep my eye on keeping it as real as possible at all times, my paintings will quickly take on this whole, I don't know, I call it a storybook feel. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and I'm starting to feel like maybe that is just my style of painting, and I haven't accepted it because it comes to me naturally, especially when I'm thinking of something out of my head or I'm not looking at a reference photo. Now, for this, I did kind of take a glance at a reference color book page, coloring book page, but there was no like painted image or picture that I pulled this from. So maybe that was the issue. I really need to pay more attention to that. I do believe that I tend to be able to give something more of a realistic look if I'm looking at a reference photo, which means that I really need to figure out how to bridge the difference, so that when I'm not looking at a reference photo, my paintings may not take on so much of a seem like they need to be in a fairy tale book or something. I don't know. We all have those things about our work that we feel we need to work on. But for the most part, I was really, sort of pleased with the way this ended up coming out. The crayons perform really well for what they are, as long as you keep what they are in mind. I was not expecting them really to give me the payoff that they did. Once I went in with the black crayon, it did add a layer of depth to the painting. But I was really kind of scared to do that because black sometimes can desaturate your paintings too much. But in this case, it didn't. I was worried about nothing. I went in with some bleed-proof white in order to add a few highlights, glimmers to the water on top of the rocks, just spruce things up here and there. And that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Of course, you guys saw through birds in the sky, which I normally do. And that's going to bring this particular composition to an end, my friends. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and see you guys on the other side of this painting. Well, okay, friends, here we are. Here's the finished composition. There still seems to be more that I could do to it, but this is the point where I'm going to stop for this video. It really turned out with a really kind of storybooky cartoon feel, and I guess that's okay. Much better than me just giving up on it. I will have a review for these water-soluble wax-based pastels coming up really soon, because I've done quite a few illustrations with them now, and I think I'm ready to offer my opinion, so you guys can stay tuned for that. If by chance you liked anything that you saw in the video today, don't forget to sprinkle a little love and give the video a thumbs up. If you choose to, you can share. Sharing is caring, and it's going to get it in front of other wonderful viewers like yourself. Jump in the comments section. Let me know what you think of today's pastel choice, of today's illustration. Have you used watercolor crayons? What's been your experience with them? Do you like them? Let's get that conversation going in the comments section. If you're new or returning and you haven't subscribed, do consider hitting that subscription button and notification bell so you don't miss when we go live or when we upload. And of course, you can check the video description for all of the relevant links. Do consider checking out Patreon. And do check out the Defiant Art website, which is also listed in the video description. Thank you guys for joining me. I really enjoyed doing Distant with you guys today. And until next time, just keep creating.